In the niche world of medium format folder cameras, you have a couple brands that really stand above the others. You have Zeiss Icon and their super Iconta cameras. You have Voigtlander and their Besta cameras. Going over to Japan, you have Mamiya and their Mamiya 6 back in the day. And then more modern, you have Fuji and their Fuji folders. Well, I'm going to bring in one pre-World War II brand that also deserves some recognition, and that is Welta and their camera, the Welta Weltur. So Welta was a camera company more so known in the pre-war era. They're first established in 1914 as Welta Kamerawerk in Dresden, which happened to be one of the foremost camera manufacturing hubs in the world at the time. And really, as I said, they had some really advanced cameras, especially in the 1930s. They had some kooky designs, such as the Welta Prefecta. Welta did survive World War II, but in the ruins of the war, they found themselves in Dresden, still in Eastern Germany. And for that reason, as a company, they did not flourish as much, I would say. Many of their cameras that came out, for example, in the 1950s, were pretty rudimentary for the time period and were more so meant for consumers in the Eastern Bloc as well as the Western Bloc. And if you just look at this TLR, the Welta Flex, for example, it was pretty rudimentary for the time. And if you compare it to Western manufacturers like Yashica or Rolleiflex, well, you're going to see just why it was meant for maybe a more budget-oriented crowd. Just like many other camera companies in Eastern Germany at the time, they were consolidated at the end of the 1950s into what would eventually become Pentacon, and that is the end of the Welta or Welta story. So let's rewind back to the 1930s with the Welta Weltur, a very advanced folder camera for the time. It came in three formats: 6x9, 6x6, and 6x4.5. Mine happens to be a 6x4.5, and it also came with a few different lenses, all pretty good lenses for the period, such as a Carl Zeiss Jena Tessar or a Schneider Xenar, which is what I have, and that is a 75mm f2.8, so fairly fast for the time as well. Now let's talk briefly about what makes the Weltur an advanced camera for the time. For starters, it actually had a 2-in-1 coupled rangefinder viewfinder window. Most cameras for the time did not. It was either separate or the rangefinder was uncoupled. Then also this folder has what would be called whole unit focusing, which means the whole lens shifts as you focus as opposed to just the front element. And what this means is that it's going to have sharper images, especially for closer objects. So those two things make it a very capable camera and a very easy camera to use. It does use the standard red window film advance, which rudimentary, but also a little more foolproof, or I'd say mechanical error proof if you ask me. So that's no real flaw. Now I have shot this camera before in the past. For example, I brought it along to the American Southwest, which, it's just a great place to test the camera out. And the thing about it was the photos turned out great, but I noticed just some slight blur in many of these photos because I was shooting handheld at about 1/200th or 1/400th of a second, which should be fine, but with these folders, they do tend to get that camera shake really easily. Nonetheless, I decided to bring it out once more, and wanting to avoid blurry photos, I decided to bring the camera along as well as a tripod. It was another sunny winter day in the park, and all the streams were quite swollen with rainwater. Wanting to achieve a real 1930s look with my photos, I decided to load up some ADOX CHS II 100. And for those who don't know, this is a great film stock to try, and it does have an old school look because the emulsion or the film type itself is fairly old. Loading this camera is pretty straightforward, so if you've ever advanced film using a red window, then this Welta is no different. Also, I opted to use a yellow filter and lens hood. This is something of a must for me when I'm shooting with these old folders because it helps bring out a little extra contrast from these pre-war uncoated lenses. This first photo definitely displays the look that I was going for. Subtle but present contrast, wider depth of field, and just overall very sharp image. This Xenar lens undoubtedly performs best top down, and I think the results show why. At this point in the afternoon, I was really starting to get some strong directional light. This, combined with the motion blur of the raging creek, really creates something special here. In so many ways, it's hard to believe that this was photographed with a 90-year-old camera. The contrast and sharpness almost look on par with a lens produced in the computer age, if you ask me. One downside of this camera, and it's a downside shared with many cameras from this era, is just the lack of precision that you get with the viewfinder. If you look at a newer camera, a lot of time you're actually going to have rangefinder or viewfinder lines, and that helps quite a bit. So if you're relying on a really precise composition, you are going to have to really just do a lot of trial and error with a camera like this. So yeah, quick successful evening hike with the Welta Weltur. I think it gives you a decent idea what to expect when you're shooting stop down with a tripod, but I did throw in some handheld shots from the southwest as well for you to look at. So I hope if you're going to shoot this camera, you're going to expect at least to get some usable landscape photos out of it. And with that rangefinder that's coupled to the viewfinder, it's going to be some quick, easy shooting in general. Overall, I'm really happy with this camera. It's definitely one that I'm going to be keeping in the long term and just keeping in my backpack just for shits and gigs, you know, if I'm ever finding something worth photographing. Nonetheless, I hope you enjoyed the video and stick around in the future because I know I've got more folder videos worth sharing.